Composition is the single most important thing we need to think about when creating a work of art. For other kinds of visual artists, whether it's abstract painters, photographers or graphic designers, composition is the main focus of their work. But when we're learning to draw and paint from life, composition is often an afterthought because we're too busy trying to make our work appear lifelike. I really wish I'd been taught some of the things I'm about to show you in this video much earlier on in my career, because until I learned about composition, all of my paintings sucked. In most art classes, the model has already been set up for us, so we focus on how to paint without really thinking about what it is we're painting. I'm certainly guilty of this because all of my videos are about learning how to paint. But believe it or not, what you paint is even more important because your viewer will be drawn to your subject matter and how interesting your painting is long before they notice any of your fancy brushwork. Composition is the foundation or framework upon which a whole painting is built. So artists have thought long and hard about what makes a good composition, and we've ended up with countless theoretical rules and principles. The first rule people are always taught is the rule of thirds. I don't really know what's so special about thirds, but it's basically saying don't place your main centre of interest in the middle of your painting. That's all very well for the main centre of interest, but what about the rest of the image? Unfortunately, composition is a lot more complicated because there's often more than just one centre of interest, and there's an infinite variety of other visual elements that we also need to think about. Colours, tonal values, textures, shapes, lines, and so on. Later on, I'll be sharing a much more complete rule, which is the first step to achieving a good composition. But really, the purpose of this video is to show you that while knowing these rules can be helpful, none of them hold the secret to great composition. At the end of the day, the only way you're going to learn about composition is through lots and lots of practice. Fortunately, there's a really valuable exercise that even complete beginners can do to start developing their sense of colour and design, which is painting still lifes. I painted hundreds of still lifes back when I was a beginner, but I just used to select a couple of objects at random and immediately start painting. But this misses out the most valuable part of the exercise. Remember, what you choose to paint is the most important thing in a painting. So setting up before you start is the most important stage of a painting. So in this video, I'm going to show you the correct way to set up a still life. And you don't need to look far for inspiration, as there's a wealth of colour available at your local grocery store. I really wish someone had shown me this back when I was a beginner, because I would have learned to create much more interesting paintings, and I probably would have enjoyed more success early on in my career. When setting up a still life, I'll start with an object that I find interesting. I'll then place some different objects alongside it to see how they work together. This is literally what the word composition means: to bring together separate parts so that they work as a whole. The first way I'm going to try to bring these objects together is to find colours that work together, to create a colour harmony. Here we have green and red, which is a complementary harmony. And now I'm introducing another object to create a triad of red, green and violet. Next, I'm going to substitute the bright red pepper for these grey-pink potatoes. So I now have an intense green combined with a more neutral version of red. But you don't necessarily need to use complementary colours. Here we have a more analogous harmony of green and blue. Or you can try using lots of different colours. The possibilities are endless, so it's really important that you spend time searching for notes of colour that work well together. Another way of bringing separate objects together is by combining them into larger underlying shapes. Notice how these objects form a triangle. Probably around 90% of all still life paintings are triangle compositions. That's because when you place objects at eye level, they usually form a triangle. But just by changing the eye level, it's possible to find different shapes. Other ways you can unify different shapes is by using vertical and horizontal lines. You can also use diagonals or curves. But the most important shape you need to think about before anything else is the shape of the whole canvas. I'm trying to fit my composition into the 16:9 aspect ratio of my camera, but you can crop your image any way you like. Here, I'm using a viewfinder to help me decide. Remember, you don't always need the whole of each object to be completely within the frame. It can often be interesting to crop some of them so that they lead the viewer into the painting. The 16:9 aspect ratio of my camera is actually a √3 rectangle, which is used in dynamic symmetry. This is a formal theory of composition which claims that Renaissance artists use complicated geometry to place lines and centres of interest within a specific series of rectangles. If you study these mathematical formulas, they may make it easier to achieve better compositions, but then again, you might be able to achieve something just as good if you spent the same amount of time and effort moving shapes around and experimenting. Remember, composition isn't only about shapes, and it's all very subjective, so none of these theories contain all the answers. You still need to find what works for you. However, when it comes to shapes, there's a really simple rule which will help you avoid one of the most common compositional mistakes, and that is no two shapes within your painting should be the same size. This includes all the negative spaces and the distances between your objects and the edges of the canvas. If you only follow this one rule, you'll be well on your way to creating much more interesting paintings. Here you can see I've placed a cardboard box over my subject in order to create some stronger shadow shapes. This is another essential component of composition, the light and dark pattern, and it's probably the most effective way of grouping separate objects together into either the lights or the shadows. This is sometimes referred to as notan, which is a Japanese word that means something like light-dark harmony. I'll usually do a number of thumbnail sketches in pencil, using just 3 main values: the lights, shadows and midtones, and I'll try out several different abstract designs. I'll also do thumbnails in colour. Remember, your subject is the most important thing in your painting, so you need to make sure you spend enough time doing studies and experimenting before deciding what to paint. At the end of the day, it's this process that holds the real key to mastering composition, more so than any particular theory. So I did 2 colour studies, one with a red background and one with a dark. And I think I prefer the combination of bright red radishes with the more neutral potatoes against the darker background. I've now started the final painting, and I've just blocked in all the large shapes that make up my subject. I can already see that my colour harmony and composition is working, so I'm going to carry on with this painting. But if I was to find anything wrong with it, I need to change it during these early stages, before refining or adding details. Here, I'm starting work on the leaves of the cabbage, using a palette knife to try and capture their texture. This is going to be one of my main centres of interest. Which brings me to the final and what is probably the most important component of composition. The main focal points, or the areas of your painting that will draw the viewer's attention. These include small details, notes of intense colour like this bright red radish, or hard accents and areas of high contrast like the edges of this brown paper bag. You may have just a few centres of interest or many, and they can be arranged to form shapes or lines that will lead the viewer around your painting. Here you can see the top of the cabbage and the radishes form a large triangle. But my centres of interest also form 2 smaller triangles. As I said before, when it comes to combinations of shapes and colours, there are infinite possibilities. So composition is an immense subject. In fact, it's far greater and more important than just learning how to paint from life. So this is by no means a comprehensive video on everything you need to know about composition. Its purpose is just to get you to start thinking about it a little more deeply. and to give you a brief summary of the main things you need to consider, which are colour harmony, how you crop your canvas, the light and dark value pattern, underlying shapes and lines, and your main centres of interest. The terms composition and harmony come from music. And when an image works on a purely visual level, so that it doesn't matter what the subject is, but instead it's an interesting arrangement of shapes and colours, then painting really does become like music. And this is probably one of the highest achievements we can aim for in representational art. If we can transform a mundane subject like cabbage and potatoes into a thing of beauty. Painting still lifes is one of the best ways to develop this skill. It teaches you how to create complete works of art instead of just doing studies. As a wise artist once said, if you can paint a still life, you can paint anything. Anyway, that's enough about composition. If you want to learn more about painting from life, check out the courses on my Patreon channel. Until next time, good luck with your painting and thank you for watching.